June 22, 1940, a railway car in the Forest of Compiègne. Inside, French generals signed the armistice that ended their war with Germany. Outside, in the cities and villages across France, ordinary people gathered around radios. They listened as their world collapsed. But that same evening, something unexpected began to happen. In cafes and kitchens, on street corners, and in shuttered shops, French citizens started asking one question. A question whispered at first, then spoken louder as the days passed. What would Britain do now? The answer came on June 18th, 4 days before the armistice. A French general most had never heard of stood before a BBC microphone in London. His name was Charles de Gaulle. He was 49 years old, and he said something no one in occupied France was allowed to say. France has lost a battle, but France has not lost the war. His voice crackled across the channel. Few heard it that first night. The broadcast barely registered, but within days, copies of his words began circulating, written on scraps of paper, repeated in whispers. And always, the same reaction followed. Britain was going to fight on. The news spread like a current beneath the surface. In Lyon, a schoolteacher named Marie Lefebvre wrote in her diary on June 24th, "They say the English will not surrender. I do not know if this is true, but God, I hope it is." In Paris, under German occupation, a baker named Henri Dubois told his wife late one night, "The British are mad. They cannot win alone, but perhaps madness is what we need now." The emotions were complicated, tangled, raw. For 6 weeks, France had fought, and France had fallen. The German blitzkrieg had torn through their defenses like paper. 300,000 French soldiers were dead or captured. The government had fled to Vichy. Marshal Philippe Pétain, the hero of Verdun, now led a regime that collaborated with the enemy, and Britain had evacuated. At Dunkirk in late May, over 338,000 Allied troops had been pulled from the beaches. Nearly 140,000 of them were French, but the evacuation felt like abandonment to many. British ships had sailed home. French soldiers watched them go. Some felt betrayed. Others understood there was no choice. Now, 3 weeks later, those same British were refusing to negotiate peace. Prime Minister Winston Churchill addressed Parliament on June 18th, the same day as de Gaulle's broadcast. His words were defiant, unshakable. "We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be." When French civilians heard this, the reaction split. Some felt anger. A wine merchant in Bordeaux was overheard saying, "They left us to die, and now they play the hero. Let them face Germany alone, they will learn." But others felt something else, something unexpected. Hope. A nurse in Marseille, tending to wounded soldiers, wrote to her sister on June 26th, "The British are still fighting. It means the war is not over. It means Hitler has not won. I cannot explain it, but I feel lighter." In the small village of Saint-Rémy-de-Provence, an elderly man named Claude Moreau gathered his neighbors in secret. He had a hidden radio. He tuned it to the BBC. They listened to the news in English, understanding only fragments, but they understood enough. Britain had rejected Hitler's peace offers. The Luftwaffe was preparing to invade, and the Royal Air Force was ready to meet them. One woman began to cry, not from sadness, from relief. "Someone is still fighting," she said. For many French civilians, this was the turning point. Not politically, not militarily, but emotionally. The armistice had brought a crushing sense of defeat, of humiliation. France, the great nation, had fallen in 6 weeks. The Germans paraded through Paris. The swastika flew over the Eiffel Tower, but Britain's refusal to surrender meant something profound. It meant the story was not over. By early July, the Battle of Britain had begun. German bombers crossed the channel daily. RAF pilots scrambled to intercept them. The dogfights raged above southern England, and in France, people listened. They listened on illegal radios. They read smuggled copies of de Gaulle's broadcasts. They whispered the news to trusted friends. And slowly, a new emotion emerged alongside the shame and the anger: admiration. A farmer in Normandy, whose fields now hosted German troops, said to his son, "The English are stubborn, like mules, but God bless them for it." In Toulouse, a university professor risked his life to distribute leaflets. They contained excerpts from Churchill's speeches. One student later recalled, "We read those words, and we felt human again. We felt like we had not lost everything." But admiration came with guilt. France had surrendered, Britain had not. The comparison was inescapable. Some French citizens felt ashamed; they had given up. The British were still standing. What did that say about France? A Parisian journalist, writing in his private journal on July 15th, captured this tension. "We watch the British fight, and we are inspired, but we are also humiliated. They do what we could not, and we hate ourselves for it." Yet there was another layer, a quieter one. Many French civilians believed Britain's resistance kept the flame alive, not just for Britain, for all of Europe, for France itself. If Britain fell, Hitler would be unstoppable, but if Britain survived, then one day, France might rise again. This belief took root in unexpected places. In occupied Paris, a group of students began meeting in secret. They called themselves Resistance. The word was not yet famous, but it would be. They printed pamphlets. They sabotaged German supply lines in small ways, and they took courage from one fact: Britain was still fighting. By late August, the Luftwaffe had lost over 1,000 aircraft. The RAF held. Operation Sea Lion, Hitler's planned invasion, was postponed, then cancelled. The Battle of Britain was won, and in France, people wept. Not openly, not in public, but in kitchens and attics and cellars. They allowed themselves to feel something they had not felt since June: pride, not in themselves, but in the human spirit, in the refusal to quit, in the idea that tyranny could still be resisted. A shopkeeper in Lille wrote to her cousin in unoccupied France on September 20th, "The British have done it, they have survived. I do not know what this means for us, but I know it means something." What it meant, in the end, was this: France had fallen, but the war had not ended, and as long as the war continued, there was a chance to fight back, a chance to reclaim what had been lost, a chance to prove that the armistice was not the final word. De Gaulle understood this. His Free French forces, based in London, numbered only a few thousand at first, but they grew. French pilots flew with the RAF. French sailors joined the Royal Navy. And in France itself, the resistance began to organize. They took inspiration from Britain, from Churchill's speeches, from the simple, stubborn fact that one nation had refused to bow. A resistance fighter in Brittany, interviewed after the war, said, "When we heard the British were still fighting, we knew we had to fight too. Not because they asked us, but because they showed us it was possible." This was the gift Britain gave France in the summer of 1940. Not military aid, not liberation, that would come later, but something more fragile and more powerful: the belief that defeat was not permanent, that surrender was not inevitable, that even in the darkest hour, resistance was possible. And for the French civilians who lived through that time, this belief sustained them. Through 4 years of occupation, through the horrors of collaboration and deportation and reprisal, through the slow, grinding wait for liberation, they held on because someone else had held on first. A final diary entry, written by Marie Lefebvre on June 6, 1944, the day of the Normandy invasion, captured this perfectly. The British came back, they brought the Americans, they brought freedom, but more than that, They brought the proof that we were right to hope. 4 years ago, when France fell, they did not give up. And because they did not give up, neither did we. This is the story that history sometimes forgets. The story of what French civilians said when Britain fought on. They said many things, some bitter, some hopeful, some conflicted, but in the end, they said the thing that mattered most. Thank you.